Do some cafe au lait, so I'm bringing it back for you. Well, on the plane tonight, this morning. Hannity, you travel a lot, right? Everything blurs into everything else. You have no idea what time it is, when to eat, when to sleep.
What time is it?
And that's what we've been doing. It's 4 o'clock, they tell me, in the morning.
Oh, 4 in the morning. Yeah. Well, I hate to tell you, when you go to Singapore and Vietnam, I'm doing the show 9 a.m. And I stay on I stay on East Coast time by like putting the shades down. They think I'm nuts, But it works.
Hannity, great show. Great
job with the president
today.
I saw some of the interview. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'm Laura Ingraham, and this is the Ingraham Angle, live from a sort of blustery Paris tonight. In just moments, you're going to see my exclusive interview with President Trump, where he reflects on the sacrifices made by the greatest generation 75 years ago today. Hard to believe. But he also addresses the shocking threat reportedly coming from Nancy Pelosi. Unbelievable. The economic impact of tariffs against Mexico and the cozy and possibly dangerous relationship warming up between Russia and China. But first, a day of remembrance. As we conclude this 75th anniversary of the D-Day invasion here in France, well, we'll always remember the countless stories of sacrifice and valor displayed on those beaches. Yet it is also supremely important to recall what American troops were fighting against and for.
The lives that they gave, the sacrifice that they made, did not just win a battle. It did not just win a war. Those who fought here won a future for our nation. They won the survival of our civilization.
Allied forces were battling to protect their homelands, for sure, and against an evil ideology, Nazism. Now, some forget that the word Nazi stood for National Socialism, where the state controls the means of production and distribution. Now, advancing this system required state control of much more, including speech, thought, entire economies, people enslaved and subjugated, millions upon millions killed. Now, the only way for Nazism to succeed was for Hitler to invade and conquer country after country, and of course, the people residing within. And for a time, he succeeded, until the West, led by Churchill and FDR, and with the help and the dedication of the citizens of England, America, and our other allies, drew a line in the sand on the beaches of Normandy. Now, eventually, freedom won, and socialism, the brutality of it, lost. The unspeakable atrocities carried out under Hitler and Himmler arose not out of thin air, but from an evil ideology that they believed justified those horrors. As Churchill said, socialism is a philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. And as historian George Santayana had it right when he said this, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. The D-Day invasion was the largest amphibious assault ever attempted, and the cost in blood was devastating. But the failure, no, that was not an option.
It was here that tens of thousands of the Americans came. The GIs who boarded the landing craft that morning knew that they carried on their shoulders not just the pack of a soldier, but the fate of the world. Colonel George Taylor, whose 16th Infantry Regiment would join in the first wave, was asked what would happen if the Germans stopped. Right then and there, cold on the beach, just stopped them. What would happen? This great American replied, "Why, the 18th Infantry is coming in right behind us. The 26th Infantry will come on too. Then there is the 2nd Infantry Division, already afloat, and the 9th Division, and the 2nd Armored, and the 3rd Armored, and all the rest. Maybe the 16th won't make it, but someone will."
That can-do attitude, or as Queen Elizabeth called it, the resilience, helped the good guys win in the Second World War. And long after today's pomp and ceremony has faded, it will be up to new generations to repel, to recognize, and destroy the new evils that threaten our God-given right to live free. And now, here's my exclusive interview with President Trump from Normandy on this historic day. Mr. President, thank you so much for being here with us today. 75th anniversary of the D-Day landing. You've had, by all accounts, an incredible trip. What lessons are you going to take back home after this day and your meeting with the Queen, trip to Ireland?
Well, first of all, the meeting with the Queen was incredible. I think I can say I really got to know her because I sat with her many times, and we had automatic chemistry. You understand that feeling. It's a good feeling, but she's a spectacular woman. And the people I met so many veterans, and we're talking about people that have seen it. They've seen days like nobody else, and they are just really incredible people.
And feeling this beautiful weather, was raining last night, the weather broke. Imagining the invasion, 150,000 Allied troops climbing the cliffs, landing on these shores. What's going through your mind?
Well, this is weather like they don't normally have. You know, this was supposed to be today, a storm, and it's a little like the invasion itself. The weather was a big factor, and they delayed it a day, and it worked out okay. And you look at the weather we have beautiful weather. And it's been this way wherever I've been. And I mean, we've been now for 3.5 days, and it's like, I'm saying, is it always like this? It's pretty beautiful, but it can be pretty rough.
After having met all of these World War II veterans, this entire experience here today, what do you tell the American people about the importance of this history and our shared ideals?
That there was never a more important battle, there was never a more important event than the event 75 years ago today. Think of that. These were incredible, brave people who were just being blown up, and you have the graves all over. I mean, these were people that knew they were going to die. It was horrendous. The bravery, the valor. We're giving out medals today. You know, we're giving out medals to certain people and to certain families. This was one of the true, in terms of war, in terms of, probably you could also say in terms of peace, because this led to something very special. This was a very, very horrific day, but it was also a very special day, and it's an honor to be here.
2 years ago, the so-called experts, foreign policy experts, were predicting that you would fracture NATO, America would become isolationist. What do you say to those experts today?
Well, those are the people that failed so badly, and I haven't really gone to them. I know them, I've read them, I've seen what their result is, and the result was terrible. NATO was going down, and if you look at the money coming into NATO for the last 15 years, it's like an escalator down. And now it's like a rocket ship up. Secretary Stoltenberg has been maybe Trump's biggest fan, to be honest with you. He goes around, he made a speech the other day, he said, without Donald Trump, maybe there would be no NATO. We've gotten over $100 billion from other countries where they're starting to pay, because it got to a point where we were paying so much. I think we were really paying close to 100% of NATO. So we were paying to protect all of these European nations, and it's just not fair. And I told them that. I told the countries, the heads of the countries, I said, it's not fair. The United States possibly doesn't even benefit. You know, you could make the case, certainly in this age, that we're not benefiting, certainly not like them. And they paid over $100 billion more toward their defense. That's money that we don't have to pay.
Theresa May was praising you yesterday for the burden sharing. That it's basically about time.
Yeah, she was so nice. But they're all saying it, and they're stepping up. I would say Germany has not stepped up much. Germany's paying 1%. They should be paying much more than that. Think of it, 1%. So we protect Germany, and then Germany takes advantage of us on trade. I was with Angela Merkel yesterday, who I like a lot. I have a really good, you know, a lot of people think we don't have a good relationship. We do. And she even smiles when I say, look, you have to pay. And she sort of laughs, because for years they got away with this, and it's unfair, and they're not getting away with it.
What about her dig at you when she was at Harvard? Was that appropriate?
What did she say?
I want to leave this wish with you. Tear down walls of ignorance and narrow-mindedness, for nothing has to stay as it is.
She has to say what she has to say. I mean, you know, she took a pretty tough election a couple of days ago. But I like her. I get along with her. But I said, you have to pay. And most of the nations are now either current or very close to current. And that's a tremendous, it's over $100 billion in a very short period of time.
Mexico tariffs, big news back home. Some Senate Republicans are a little worried about this, especially economic effects. What must Mexico do? What can they do to stem this massive tide, 140,000 people in May?
When you're the piggy bank that everybody steals and robs from, and they deceive you, and they've been doing for 25 years, tariffs are a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful word if you know how to use them properly. Republicans should love what I'm doing, because I view tariffs in two phases. Number one, it's great to negotiate with, because people don't want to be tariffed for coming into the United States. They don't want that. And number two, frankly, if they go in, you make a fortune, because all the companies are going to move back into the country.
But isn't this Congress's fault for not passing asylum reform? So why does it seem like Mexico's bearing the brunt?
Because it's their fault also, because they're letting millions of people walk up through their country, and they shouldn't let anybody walk up through their country. I mean, frankly, we shouldn't even have to have Border Patrol. Border Patrol's doing incredibly. You know, they apprehended over 100,000 people last. You know what that is?
140,000 in May.
Well, and what they're doing is they're taking, and by the way, that's not even close to a record, because if you go back 13, 14 years ago, it was crazy numbers. But I don't want this. I want people to come in legally. We want the people that we want, and I want a merit-based system. But we shouldn't have anybody. They shouldn't be able to walk through Mexico. And now I've told Mexico, if you don't stop this onslaught, this invasion, people get angry when I use the word invasion. People like Nancy Pelosi that honestly, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. I watch her. She was saying, we have to protect Mexico. We have to take care of Mexico. Look, I'm dealing with Mexico right now. They send in $500 billion worth of drugs. They kill 100,000 people. They ruin 1 million families every year. If you look at that, that's really an invasion without the guns.
Are you worried about how this might affect the USMCA, another historic trade renegotiation? I'm not worried
about it, because they need us. We don't need them. They need us. They stole 32% of our car business with NAFTA, the stupidest deal, one of the truly stupid deals of our time. They stole 32,000. They have 32% of our car business.
It's an important ally of the United States. It's one of our most important trading. Well, it's one of our most important trading partners.
Okay, fine. And yet they send in $500 billion worth of drugs. We will never do that kind of trade. They send in drugs, illegal drugs, $500 billion. 100,000 people are killed, dead, every year from what comes through our southern border. They shouldn't be allowing people to come through their country from Honduras and Guatemala, El Salvador. Excuse me, look, they walk right through our country.
Coming up, part 2 of my exclusive interview with President Trump. Plus, we have Ari Fleischer, Molly Hemingway, and Alan Dershowitz here to break it all down for us. And later, Raymond Arroyo talks to some Army Rangers who scaled the same cliffs these heroes did 75 years ago. Stay there. Honoring those who sacrificed everything, we heard two very moving but somewhat different speeches from both President Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron. Now, Macron's speech was interwoven with some internationalist themes as he addressed the United States directly and even talked about what makes us great.
We know what we owe to the United States of America. The United States of America, dear Donald Trump, dear President, which is never greater than when it is fighting for the freedom of others.
But Trump, while of course recognizing the importance of the alliance, also stressed the importance of the nation-state itself.
The fierce patriotism of a free, proud, and sovereign people. They battled not for control and domination, but for liberty, democracy, and self-rule. They were sustained by the confidence that America can do anything.
Macron stayed away from, addressing really or thanking the Almighty, but it was extremely, extremely emotional and moving. He kept it all pretty secular.
Inscribed in the countryside of France, a reminder of what our country owes the United States of America. Their presence resonates. It's an invitation to us to renew this secular pact that unites France, the United States of America, and freedom.
Well, Trump picked up the religious cadences of FDR and Eisenhower.
We are a noble nation with a virtuous people praying to a righteous God. The great deeds of an army came from the great depths of their love. As they confronted their fate, the Americans and the Allies placed themselves into the palm of God's hand.
Oh my gosh, we were all bawling. That was unbelievable. Joining me now with reaction to today's incredible events in my exclusive interview with President Trump is Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary, Fox News contributor, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, also a Fox News contributor, and Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law professor emeritus. He also wrote the foreword to a published version of the Mueller report. Ari, it was so moving on so many levels. It's hard to really put it in words after this day and after this week, this trip to England with the Queen. And ending today. Yet there were striking differences between the two leaders' approach. Your thoughts?
You know, Laura, it was so moving because America is moving. The history of our country is so great, so uplifting, and we have solved so many of the world's problems for the world that an event like this brings it all home because of the sacrifice and the loss of life and then that which was accomplished. But that's America's story. It always has been. And America loves presidents who are good at telling that story and reminding us why it feels so good just to feel good to be an American.
Molly, when we were wrapping this up and leaving Normandy, as we were making our way through the little villages, and we keep thinking if the walls could talk here, imagining U.S. GIs crawling in the darkness with broken compasses, not able to locate each other. We all said to ourselves, we're so lucky to be American citizens living in our country. Your thoughts after this historic day?
Well, I'm so glad that so many Americans have taken the occasion today to think about the sacrifices of so many of our men and allied men who did something that's just almost incomprehensible. And that it is also wonderful to hear a speech like we heard today. There is not just something about this location, but it is that sacrifice of these men that inspires presidents to give great speeches. I think Reagan's speech on the 40th anniversary is perhaps his best speech of many great speeches, and today's speech was so well crafted and a really nice way to honor so many people. There were multiple points which moved me to tears thinking about some of the men who were there 75 years ago and back there today. And there is something, you hope that each generation has what that generation had. And it is nice to see younger people honoring and remembering their great sacrifice.
And Alan, I think when we look back on this time, this era, with all the changes in the world over the last 75 years, we have to remember what the troops were fighting against, which I started the show with, which was we wanted our freedom, our liberty, protect the homeland, help our allies. But it was against this evil ideology of Nazism, what it represented and what it did to people and lands and countries.
Look, I am so proud of every American who participated in the Second World War, particularly proud of my family members, several of whom served with distinction and honor in the United States Army. Remember, we did not have to go and invade Europe. The American safety and security was not at risk from the West. We had been attacked from Japan, but we had not been attacked from Germany. This was not a war of choice because we were attacked, but this was an invasion of choice. And our president and our leaders, Eisenhower and Roosevelt, made a decision to sacrifice many, many American young men in order to save France and save Britain and save Europe and save so many people that we didn't have to do. And I was very moved by the show of appreciation that European leaders have appropriately made toward the United States. They should appreciate what we did. It was a great sacrifice, and it really saved the world from the horrors of Nazism.
Ari, I want to get your reaction to an article in today's Washington Post. Quote, Trump's words on D-Day are at odds with his actions. President Trump spoke the right words in commemorating the 75th anniversary of D-Day, but did he mean them? Ari, what of that? I mean, it was an amazing speech, and they still have to criticize him. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, we're going to get into all the, the little, distortions. But your thoughts, Ari?
The word resistance, which is what the Democrats and some in the media pride themselves on, the resistance to Trump, stems from resistance by the Free French to the Nazis. And that's the same thing now. They shouldn't use the word resistance, then they shouldn't resist. There are at least 2 days a year where they should knock it off. One is Memorial Day, and the second is maybe the day that the president goes over to France on D-Day to commemorate the 75th. Just praise the president. You don't have to knock him all the time.
All right, panel, stay with me. Part 2 of my exclusive interview with President Trump coming up next. I found out what he really thinks about a lot of issues, including the politics at home, plus why the president believes Joe Biden's just not getting it on China. You don't want to miss this. It's about 4:28 in the morning here in Paris. Welcome back to the Ingraham Angle. Now more of my exclusive interview with President Trump. We passed Nancy Pelosi as we were walking up to the stage earlier. She said some pretty harsh things over the last 24 hours, leaked out from her caucus. She said, I don't want impeachment, I want him in prison, meaning you. How do you work with someone like that?
I think she's a disgrace. I actually don't think she's a talented person. I've tried to be nice to her because I would have liked to have gotten some deals done. She's incapable of doing deals. She's a nasty, vindictive, horrible person. The Mueller report came out. It was a disaster for them. They thought their good friend Bobby Mueller was going to give them a great report, and he came out with a report with 13 horrible, angry Democrats who were totally biased against me. A couple of them worked for Hillary Clinton. They then added 5 more, also Democrats. With all of that, 2.5 years, think of it. From before I even got elected, they've been going after me, and they have nothing.
Do you mind if he testifies still? Before you said you didn't care. Mueller testifies.
Let me tell you, he made such a fool out of himself the last time because what people don't report is the letter he had to do to straighten out his testimony, because his testimony was wrong. But Nancy Pelosi, I call her Nervous Nancy. Nancy Pelosi doesn't talk about it. Nancy Pelosi's a disaster, okay? She's a disaster. And let her do what she wants. You know what? I think they're in big trouble, because when you look at the kind of crimes that were committed, and I don't need any more evidence, and I guess from what I'm hearing, there's a lot of evidence coming in. But you look, and then ask Nancy, why is her district at drug needles all over the place? It's the most disgusting thing, what she's allowed to happen to her district, with needles, with drug addicts, with people living in the middle of the streets, with people living on the sidewalk. You can't go. She ought to focus on that, because she's a disaster. And she made a statement. It was a horrible,
when you were
nasty,
overseas,
vicious statement while I'm overseas. Now, if I made any statement about anybody, it would be like a big head. Why would he do that when he's overseas? She did it when she is a terrible person. And I'll tell you, her name, it's Nervous Nancy, because she's a nervous wreck.
On Tuesday, Joe Biden once again downplayed the China threat at one of his town halls in New Hampshire.
He doesn't get it.
We're in a position where we have the most agile venture capitalists in the world. It's not like they're bad guys. We're the best at doing it. Our workers are literally 3 times as productive as workers in the Far East. I mean, in Asia. And they're 3 times as productive. What are we worried about?
How happy would President Xi be to have Joe Biden be the nominee?
Well, he wants him. He wants him. Hey, look. We're taking in tens of billions of dollars. We had a 3.2 GDP first quarter. It's always 1%, less than 1%. It's always the worst quarter. We're at 3.2, a 1.5 above schedule. You know why? Because so much money's coming in from China. We never took in any money from China. And let me tell you a little secret. That's only a little tiny piece of it, because the big one is yet to come. We have $325 billion that I haven't even taxed yet. And they've already spent all of their weapons. They've done everything they can. I'll tell you, the greatest people, the farmers, our patriot farmers. And now they're going to benefit like you. And remember this about the farmers. For 15 years before I got here, everything was coming down. So this didn't happen. The farmers are going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries. But these are patriots. These are people that say, the president is right. And if I'm going to go through a little short-term problem, it doesn't matter. The president is right. Listen to those incredible people back there. These people are so amazing. And what they don't realize is that I'm holding them up because of this interview, but that's because it's you.
President.
By the way, congratulations on your ratings. I'm very proud.
Thank you very much. And President Xi and President Putin sat down yesterday, announced new trade deals, talked about their closer, warmer relationship. Your reaction to that, especially because you did want to have a better relationship, if possible, with Russia at the beginning of your term. Is that out the window now?
No,
Is it not
I think we're going to have a good relationship with Russia. I think it's hurt by the phony witch hunt. You know, I could have a good relationship with Russia. Again, we have what everyone wants. I built an economy that's incredible. We're up $14 trillion in value. Look at what's going on with the stock market. And this is despite a Federal Reserve that, frankly, should have had lower interest rates and everything else. Now, there's a safety net that's good, and it's more conservative. But if we didn't have all these interest rates, you know, who thought he was going to raise interest rates all? But if we didn't have that, we'd be at 5.2, and the stock market would be up 10,000 points more. But now we have a very conservative approach, and we've created trillions of dollars in value. And by the way, China has lost trillions of dollars in value. If somebody else, let's say the opponent, who shouldn't have even been allowed to run, you know, she happens to be a crooked person, so her name was very appropriate. But if she ever won, I would say China right now would be far ahead of the United States. Just think of it. China would have been, we are now so far ahead of China, it's not even a contest.
What could you do to unite the country at a time of great polarization? What else could you do?
So I think success should unite the country, but I will tell you, the more successful we become, the more angry people like Nancy Pelosi, who don't have what it takes, they don't know what's going on, they get angry. They should, an example is Mexico. I said, we're going to put tariffs on because we want you to help us with, because they won't pass any legislation in Congress. And I have senators and others and Pelosi coming out saying, oh, how horrible. What they're doing is they're hurting a deal. They should be saying, we're with the president, we'll do whatever he wants to do, and Mexico would fold like an umbrella. Now I have these people, and I'm saying there's some Republicans too. I think they should be ashamed of themselves. But we have Pelosi, we have crying Chuck Schumer, who's a disaster, by the way. He's a total political, you know, jerk. But we have Schumer, we have all these people. They come out and they talk about tariffs are bad. So they're killing, you know, they hurt my negotiation. Because I go into the room with the Mexicans, I'm asking them for everything. And by the way, if they don't do it, I'm putting the tariffs on, we're going to make a fortune. One thing with the tariffs, when those tariffs go on, companies are going to start moving back. Once they know they're going to stay on, companies are going to move back to the United States. They took 32% of our car industry. Every single one of those plants will move back into the United States.
You're going to get a deal with China?
Yeah, I'll definitely get a deal with China. I mean, they want to make a deal now. I will say I'd want to get a deal, but what they did was very bad. We had a deal, and they tried to renegotiate. They can't do that.
What do you pray for when you pray for this country?
Peace. Really peace. And we built up our military, we built up our wealth, we've built up everything. Our country is in such great shape right now. Iran is in a much different position than they were 2.5 years ago. 2.5 years ago, Iran was a disaster for us. Now they've got problems, let's put it that way. They're not the same country. North Korea, no nuclear tests. I have a good relationship. And we'll see what happens. We're going to see what happens. China wants to make a deal. Everybody wants to make a deal. We're the best. We're the strongest. There's nobody even close.
Mr. President, finally, did you or did you not, the world wants to know, fist bump with the Queen?
I did not, but I had a great relationship. We had a really great time. There are those that say they have never seen the Queen have a better time, a more animated time. We had a period where we were talking solid straight. I didn't even know who the other people at the table were. I never spoke to them. We just had a great time together.
Are you going to keep the conversation going with her?
Yes, I am. She is a spectacular woman, an incredible woman.
Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Good luck.
Thank you, Laura. Take care of yourself.
All right. By the way, some of you may have heard or read that President Trump supposedly held up the entire D-Day ceremony in order to do this interview with me. That is patently false, fake news. Our cue to end the interview was when we heard the Macron helicopter approaching. And that is what we did. The interview ended before Macron landed. In fact, President Trump was on the lawn waiting for President Macron, who himself was just a few minutes late. Up next, my power panel is back to respond to part 2 of this interview with President Trump. Stay there. Sees him in prison.
Well,
and now they're criticizing Trump for that?
I have to tell you, as a liberal Democrat, I am appalled at Nancy Pelosi. The idea of her weaponizing the criminal justice system and calling for the imprisonment of the President of the United States without him being charged with any crime, without him being charged with any impeachable offense. It's just outrageous. It sounds like the conversation between Stalin and Beria, where Beria said to Stalin, "Show me the man and I'll find you the crime." You can't just target a president and say we want to see him in prison without producing evidence. First of all, a president can't be tried and convicted and imprisoned while he's serving as president of the United States. I don't know what she had in mind, but it was absolutely appalling. As a liberal civil libertarian, the idea of the most important Democrat in the United States calling for the imprisonment of a president is such a core violation of civil liberties, the rule of law, and American justice. She ought to be absolutely ashamed of herself. And of course the president had a right to fight back. If anybody said that about any of us, we would have the right to fight back.
And we crossed paths with her. She walked right by us, Ari, right before the interview. And I know she said on television, I guess with CNN, she said, well, I'm not going to criticize the president while he's overseas or while I'm overseas. I'm like, yeah, you did it when he was overseas, when you were back home, Ari. I mean.
Yeah, pretty quaint notion. They've been doing it for years. They certainly did it to George Bush. But let me be the skunk at the picnic in one regard. I hope all politicians retire the line, lock their opponents up.
Yep.
You know, the criminalization of people you don't like in politics goes too far. And I'll say President Trump, and I wish his supporters wouldn't say lock her up. Same thing Pelosi shouldn't say it about Trump.
I agree completely. I wrote a whole book about it. The criminalization is wrong on both sides. We need a disarmament. We have to stop using the criminal justice system as a weapon against our political enemies.
It's been a complete disaster for the country. We wasted so many opportunities. And Molly, I have to pick up on something that not a lot of people in the media, because they're focused on, well, what he said about Pelosi. But what the president said about Russia and China, you know, they had their big meeting yesterday, and a lot of new trade deals announced between Russia and China. And the president pointed out that, look, he wanted a better relationship with Russia at the beginning of his term. He wants to get along with more countries, and he thinks that the Mueller report affected our foreign policy because of the cloud hanging over this administration. And I think that's a profound point that gets lost. Right. In the overall controversy.
When I heard Nancy Pelosi talking about putting Donald Trump in prison, I think, you know, we had this Russia hoax that for years falsely accused President Trump of being a traitor. And we haven't had enough people caring about just how that false report was weaponized by so many people in the media and in our government. And we need to know so much more about that. It did affect foreign policy. I mean, the big challenge that we've had for decades in the situation with Russia and China is being able to play them off each other. And we had a situation where nobody could play nice with Russia at a time when we really need to be keeping China in check. And the idea that we wouldn't look into this, I mean, it is possible that certain people should go to jail for their participation in this hoax, which caused so much damage, but not Donald Trump, the victim.
Let's remember, too, that the Republicans also hurt foreign policy when they went after Bill Clinton and impeached him. That really hurt American foreign policy. So I think, as Ari said, we should be critical of all sides that try to weaponize the political system and try to destroy the other party.
Yeah. All right, guys, and again, President Trump said, you know, the trade negotiations we were doing, so important for the country, that's being hurt by this perpetual, weaponization of the political dialogue. Guys, thank you so much. Fantastic conversation. And 75 years ago, 235 men scaled the jagged cliffs of Pointe du Hoc as enemy fire rained down on them. And Raymond Arroyo spoke with 2 U.S. Army Rangers who reenacted that risky climb to honor those before them.
These are the boys of Pointe du Hoc. These are the men who took the cliffs. These are the champions who helped free a continent. And these are the heroes who helped end a war.
As a doctor, I agree with CDC guidance.
In the early hours of this day in 1944, soldiers from the U.S. Army's 2nd Ranger Battalion scaled the jagged 100-foot cliffs of Pointe du Hoc. And this was while under assault from the Germans. Yesterday, members of the 75th Ranger Regiment reenacted that climb in honor of their World War II predecessors. And as heroes, they all looked on. Joining me now with more is Raymond Arroyo, Fox News contributor. Raymond.
Yeah, well, look, I got to speak with some of these Rangers who scaled the cliffs yesterday. This is Major Ross Daly and Master Sergeant Joshua Horsinger. They are from the 2nd Ranger Battalion in Washington State. After 2 days of fighting, only 90 of the original 235 Rangers were fit for battle, Laura. What they told me about the challenge of these cliffs in Normandy puts it all into perspective. You did this climb yesterday.
Yes, sir.
Was it what you were expecting? Had you done anything like that before?
No, sir. Like obviously being Rangers, we've done several climbing techniques, climbing schools, and climbing obstacles. But nothing compares to climbing Point de Hoc. Really the pinnacle event, especially for 2nd Ranger Battalion, that created our legacy as one of America's premier elite forces. So to actually stand there, feel it, smell it, hear the water, from the English Channel, and getting that experience was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, sir.
How did it change your perception and respect for the men who actually did this 75 years ago?
Like Major Daly said, as far as being in 2nd Battalion, this is something historically that's been on the top of our minds and something we celebrate every year. But actually being out there, we had safety harnesses, we had other ropes. We weren't climbing rope ladders or single-strand ropes. We weren't getting shot at. There weren't grenades going off, and it was difficult climb. So I can only imagine, with everything that they were going through at the time, what they did was just absolutely remarkable.
To sit there and try to really take in what kind of physical exertion and what kind of mental and physical attributes they had to have. Really, it drives it home for us. It's just another example for us to use when we're training our young Rangers and show them, hey, these are the legends that we owe. Because in the end, some of these legends are behind us that gave everything, and we owe it to them to continue to carry on the legacy of the Rangers.
What we're going to pass on is just continue to remember these men. I came out we did the Point de Hoc ceremony yesterday, and there was 11 veterans there, and every year there's less and less. And so just to continue to honor and remember the men that gave their lives and the men that basically kind of shaped the world we live in with their actions on that day on that Point de Hoc.
What did they say to you?
They actually thanked us, and it was difficult to hear that from them, the things that they've done. They thanked us, we thanked them, and it was a very, very surreal moment. Very, very glad to be able to be part of it.
My takeaway is, some of our younger Rangers that we brought with us to experience this anniversary, to sit there and see, a young 20-year-old Ranger look up at the cliffs and really take it in the gravity. And it's like, hey, 75 years ago, a guy just like you in a slightly different uniform was climbing those cliffs. Now it's on us, and I'm really proud of what I'm a part of, and I'm just going to try to live up every day to those guys that set the example on that day on June 6th.
Laura, it underscores the audacity of this D-Day invasion and the commitment of these young guys. As you said earlier, they had those wet grapnel ropes. They were throwing them up. Only one rope for each group made it to the top of the cliff. They said it was like climbing a greasy pole. They couldn't hold on.
Unbelievable.
And yet they scaled it in 5 minutes. Amazing.
Incredible. Raymond, thanks so much. And coming up, my final thoughts as the 75th anniversary of D-Day draws to a close. Almost 5 a.m. here in Paris. You can see the Eiffel Tower just starting to peek out. The sun just about to come up. It's been a whirlwind few days here. I want to thank the great crew of the Ingraham Angle in New York, here traveling with me in London, in Normandy, and Paris. And most importantly, thank all of those who serve the cause of freedom, the fight against totalitarianism, and all your sacrifices. Those who've gone on to their final rest, and those still living. You're our legacy. We're going to do our best to honor that. America now and forever, here from Paris. That's all the time we have tonight. Shannon Bream and the Fox News at Night team.